Craig Albert, Augusta University's Graduate Director of Intelligence and Security Studies. Thank you so much for being here.
Love being here. Thanks for having me.
Can I call you a political science professor still?
Oh, absolutely. I'm still a political science professor, but just now focused on the intelligence and security studies side of political science.
Well, I do appreciate it. And you know, it was funny. A couple of weeks ago, you tweeted, "Hey, Brad, I'm ready to talk about Syria whenever you are." That's right after we had attacked certain areas of Syria to weaken their ability to launch chemical attacks. This after an alleged chemical attack on the Syrian people by the Syrian government. I haven't heard anything since. What's going on over there?
So the situation in Syria is pretty dire, not for necessarily chemical attacks, though we still think that they have some stored and we didn't get all of that. But what we need to be cautious of right now is the Iranian proxy conflict that's taking place in Israel. So that seems to be a major catalyst for conflict, and it could erupt the entire Middle East in something very catastrophic involving Hezbollah, which is a terrorist group kind of funded by Iran, in Lebanon and in the Gaza Strip, inside Palestine, Greater Palestine, inside Syria. So if you have Israel conducting airstrikes against Iranian targets in Syria, which has been happening in the past couple of weeks, major airstrikes, they took out about a dozen facilities that are Iranian-owned inside Syria. That gives Iran the right to strike back. Now, Israel said it struck as a counterstrike, meaning Iran fired some missiles from Syrian infrastructure, and Israel said, we're just firing back. But they completely destroyed Iranian infrastructure, and Iran said very publicly, we're going to hit back, and we're going to hit back with non-traditional methods. What that usually means is through terrorism, through state terrorism, using Hezbollah.
Why do we care that Iran, Iraq, and Syria are fighting each other? Why not just let them go at it?
That is an interesting question.
Yeah.
I could get academic. There's lots of research on this. The main thing is we care because you want to respect human rights. This conflict in particular, conflicts in the Middle East specifically, have severe abuses of human rights, severe persecution. You have instances of acts of genocide committed against different ethnic groups, religious groups, cultural groups. We see this with ISIS, that they committed acts of genocide against the Kurds, against the Yazidis. At one point, forcing the entire population on Mount Sinjar and kind of executing them in mosques on the mountain. We care about this not only for the human rights, but because, in particular, Israel is what the United States foreign policy has positioned as one of the only democracies in the Middle East. And the United States has a long-standing pillar of deep engagement where we want to promote democracies. So some hesitate and say Israel isn't necessarily the best democracy, but United States foreign policy suggests it's the only democracy in the Middle East, so we have to work with it even with its defects. So you don't want to have a major escalation of conflict because it'll disrupt the entire geopolitical space there and could cause an even grander war, which would draw us into it. Israel is our best friend in that region.
Right, I was going to go ahead.
So if they get in a major conflict and they need our help, then we're going to go help them, even if it means boots on the ground.
Right, and I was going to ask you about that. Don't Iran and Syria and other countries in the Middle East see an attack on Israel as an attack on the U.S., and why in the world would they do that? They know that, right?
They do know that. They don't know, and President Obama kind of set this precedent, how the United States would act in that situation. So he was very cautious. He was very soft about how he was, I should say he was very soft-spoken. He didn't tell people exactly how he would respond. And so and he didn't respond for Russian aggression in Ukraine, at least not with boots on the ground. So many started to perceive the United States as a weaker actor, that we did not want to go into foreign wars since we had been in Iraq and Afghanistan for so long. Trump has a different foreign policy perspective, and he says we will defend Israel at all costs. He's very outspoken about this. You can tell he's outspoken about the Israeli issue because of his recent moving of the embassy, the United States Embassy, from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem.
We just saw that this past week.
Exactly, and that caused major chaos, but that should signal to the rest of the world that if you mess with Israel, you mess to the United States.
Let me ask you about staying in that part of the country, the president's decision to pull out of the deal that President Obama worked out with Iran when it came to denuclearization. President Trump never liked that deal. He said, we'll get out of it. And so we did. Where does that go from here? I get the sense, if you really read a lot, that perhaps the deal could still be reworked, that it's not just abandoned outright. What are your thoughts?
The other 5 parties are staying in the deal as of right now. Trump's idea was from a political science perspective, so I'll try to stay out of partisan politics, which is mired in this, that the deal would still allow Iran to get nuclear weapons within 15 to 25 years, that it was just a pause on their activity.
Okay.
And while people say that, many experts and foreign policy experts say Iran hasn't broken any parts of the deal. In fact, that's correct. By the letter of the law, they have not broken the treaty. But the spirit of the law, they have broken. They have developed some intercontinental ballistic missiles. They have tested some of those. That shows that they're doing things that could still propel their nuclear industry once this treaty goes away, when the sunset clause takes effect, that they could be ready then to have a warhead and put it on an intercontinental ballistic missile. So Trump says we're going to pull out of that. His goal of pulling out is to renegotiate something that would prevent that longer-term acquisition of nuclear weapons by Iran, which this current deal still allows for.
What are your thoughts on what level of hope do you have on those renegotiations taking place, and if so, being successful?
That's a tough question.
It seems impossible right now.
It does seem impossible, but what we see is that the other 5 members of the 6-party talks with Iran for the nuclear deal are in fact still negotiating with them right now. Iran is trying to ask everybody to not put sanctions on them, so they do not want these attached sanctions, and so they're doing everything they can to reassure their counterparts that are involved in this treaty that they're not going to break the deal because they don't want these sanctions placed on them. That means you can tell there's some leverage there for the United States. So maybe we won't put any sanctions on you if you come to the negotiation table and negotiate based on what the president wants right now.
Let's talk about China and the threat of tariffs on both sides, us threatening tariffs against China, China against us. Where does this trade war go from here, and is it a smokescreen for a bigger problem between our two nations?
I think it's not a trade war yet. We'll call it a trade scrimmage.
Right, trade scrimmage, yes. It's early. It's early.
It's early. It could lead there, but it's not there yet. President Trump has a profound policy of America first.
Right.
And this is kind of his foreign policy, which is implementing on top of our grand strategy of global engagement. He thinks, I mean, we have a massive trade deficit with China, over $300 billion a year. They outtrade the United States. So that causes serious harm to our economy. So President Trump says we're going to increase tariffs so we can receive some, or you're going to stop receiving this amount of surplus from us. So what he's asking is that they reduce that by $200 billion over the next few years, which seems almost impossible.
Yeah.
What we know from Donald Trump, based on his past business deals, is that he tends to negotiate in the absolute extreme to bring them somewhere that's further than what the opposition wanted, but that's closer to what President Trump actually wants. So this is his negotiation strategy. He probably wants to see some reduction in the trade deficit to say he put America first, force China to come to the table to reduce the trade deficit that the United States has. And he's not going to get what he wants, but he hopes that he can negotiate something that benefits us more in his understanding of how the world works. The counter to that is China might say, we're not playing ball with you. We're going to put trade tariffs on your economy, and that's going to hurt us, especially our Midwest farmers.
Have we started paying more for things yet? And if not, that's got to be coming if this stays the way it is, right?
There's no significant increase in anything yet in the American consumer market, but look for something on soybeans, for instance, in the Midwest that could significantly impact our agriculture.
What about gas? Why is it going up? Is it just because it's summertime and we're all getting ready to travel? Every time I fill up, gas is going up. I saw that the other day and I thought I'll ask Craig about it.
It typically goes up during the summer.
Yeah.
You're right, that's typical, but this is the highest increase we've seen in gas. That's just the oil's market. You know, OPEC has a set price that they try to negotiate for how much oil costs. Anything in the Middle East could affect, any conflict in the Middle East, major oil suppliers could affect this. Any oil-producing countries that have major domestic turmoil affects the price of oils. This is probably a result of pulling out of the Iran nuclear deal. So they're not sure what that is going to do with oil and gas prices overseas. I wouldn't worry too much. I wouldn't expect it to go too much higher. And if it does, we do have a lot in reserves that we could pull out to reduce the amount of the price at the pump right now. We could also negotiate that as well. So who knows? With the president, I mean, he has several strategies with this kind of stuff, and he kind of enjoys solving problems in big, spectacular ways.
Speaking of solving problems, President Trump hoping to solve a lot of them with an upcoming summit in North Korea in Singapore, if that takes place. We want to tackle that with Dr. Albert in just a moment. We also want to talk about immigration and, as I mentioned at the top of the broadcast, the upcoming elections in our country and where they stand, how they bode for the president's second term potentially, when the Means Report continues.